Welcome to Yeukai Business Show, UK's premier business show where we feature business thought leaders, high achievers, and industry experts. Today's episode is brought to you by World Outsourcing Solutions Limited, a company that specializes in helping executive business owners with virtual assistant services and business growth systems. Here's your host.
Hello everyone, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today. So it's Trevor here, and I'm joined for this episode by my guest Kathryn Read. Now, Kathryn's an international expansion expert with over 25 years in global marketing. That's a long time. So she's learned a lot of things that she can share with us. Through her consulting services, she helps businesses create a thriving global marketplace. So if you're looking for world domination, or maybe at this stage just scaling up your business to enter a new marketplace, then Kathryn can help. So it's great to have her on the show. Welcome, Kathryn Read.
Thanks for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's great to have the opportunity. It really is. So before we jump into world domination tactics and strategies, just share a little bit about, 25 years is a long time experience, which stands you in good stead now. But I'm sure some of that was a little bit bumpy. Some of that was probably unplanned. Just share a little bit about your journey, your background that's got you to where you are really now.
Actually, I started out as a modern languages student, so I had to spend a year abroad, and I spent that year in Austria and had a really great time. So much so that I actually wanted to have another year in Austria after I'd finished at uni. But of course, I needed to justify that to my parents, and I also needed to do something constructive for myself. And I found a university course, like a postgraduate certificate, that was international business and trade. And so I thought, well, that seems like a logical thing to do if I've studied languages. And so that was how I kind of fell into international business. And back in the UK, after that year, I was looking for a job in export, but I didn't really have any kind of practical idea as to what that would look like. And so I started out in an administrative position that wasn't really my cup of tea, but it stood me in very good stead over the years. And when my colleague, who was the area sales rep for various markets, left for pastures new, then my boss at the time offered me the opportunity. And I think in that particular company, I was the first person, because it was automotive spares and engine parts or engine filters. So I think I was the first female in the sales space. So it was quite an interesting beginning, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is like where we start is not where we end up, is it? Sometimes it's looking back, we really value where we start from, but there's always things that we learn. We're in an environment that's new, we adapt, we suddenly get an understanding of the bigger picture of how the organization works or whatever, and then that stands us in good stead for the next step, whatever that might be. Now that's really interesting.
Definitely.
Just keen to just pick up on one of the points you mentioned there, but just the fact that it was very male dominated kind of industry or area within business.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's a better balance now, sort of within the work and the organisations that you help, or is there still sort of like a gender inequality?
I think the situation has improved over the years, but at least at the entry level of people taking care of markets. But I think that the further up the ladder that you go, the more imbalance is still in place, partly because, especially when you're talking about international trade, it's often very difficult for mums of young kids to be in a role that actually requires them to do a lot of travel. And consequently, there tends to be this kind of abrupt fall off after maybe the age of like mid-30s, let's say, where a lot of women fall out of the international travel market as far as work is concerned, and they move into more back office kind of roles and maybe come back into that traveling kind of a position. later on in life when the kids are a little bit older and it's a little bit easier to manage family-wise.
Yeah. Okay, no, that makes sense. Is there a cultural aspect to it as well, depending on the different sort of nationalities, different nations where you're operating as a business or looking to start?
Definitely. I mean, I would say that there are countries, especially there are even countries that people wouldn't expect. For example, in Turkey, I always found that there were really a lot of ladies who were very active in international sales and marketing, usually on the marketing side, which tends to be very office-based. Then there are lots of that's quite female dominated, but the international sales side tends to be quite male dominated. But in Turkey, I found that was quite well balanced. China is also quite well balanced in lots of ways. Same in most of Asia.
Yeah.
So yeah, it tends to be, I would say, there are some places in Europe, or obviously there are some cultures who just, it's not so usual for women to work outside the home once they have a family, and so it varies very much across
Yeah.
countries and cultures.
Okay. Yeah. But for the ladies that listen, be encouraged if you're struggling or just have the wrong perception that actually, male domination, I'm not going to get through it. There's not the same opportunities. It's better than it was, isn't it?
It's definitely better than it was, and sometimes it can be to your advantage to be maybe the only female in an organization, because they will always remember you. If you're the first time that they had a salesperson come in who was female, for instance, for me in the automotive industry, I was often the first time that when I came to somewhere in Africa, or I came to somewhere, in the Near East or the Middle East, then they would remember me, and a lot of those relationships have lasted over the years. So
yeah. That's good. A lot of it's how we perceive and frame any experience, isn't it? Really, which sort of touches on the mindset aspect, which would be great to dig into a bit if we get a chance. But I like that. That's all good stuff. So you're very kind of, you have a global reach, but you're particularly strong in Asia, China, that sort of area more. Any specific reason why you think that might be? Like, for people listening, depending on the product or services, the company that they're running, is there a link to how well you've been successful there that maybe people can also kind of get involved in that aspect? Or do you just, I don't know, do you think it's depending on the product or the service?
I think to some extent it depends on the product or the service, because obviously if you have something which is maybe, I don't know, a food speciality from Estonia, maybe it's going to be more difficult to sell that in Vietnam than it would be to sell it somewhere in Europe, where people might be more open to other European specialities, those kind of things. Generally, I would say if you're looking to get into Asian markets and you're based in, for example, the US, or you're based in Europe, then probably Asia is not the first place that you should be starting out as your first export market. You should probably go for something a little bit closer to home. So if you're US based, then maybe Mexico or somewhere in South America is a better place to start, or Canada, of course, is quite a logical step. Or if you're based somewhere UK or Europe, that you go for somewhere European based, maybe a market in Eastern Europe if you're already in Western Europe, or Scandinavia, something like that. But once you start to look at, okay, I want to really expand my international reach and I want to spread my market risk, for example, then the Asian markets are usually quite a good opportunity, partly because they're very open to imported products, and often you can get by in English, even with English labels and so on. For example, markets like Singapore, Malaysia, if your product is labeled in English, then you don't actually need to put something in local language in order to be able to put it on the shelf, which of course helps with costs and so on. But of course, if you're going to any market which is further away, then the culture gets more different, and the potential for it getting very expensive very fast if things go wrong actually increases. So you have to be more careful about your strategy and your planning in order to go into a market with open eyes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So let's dig into the strategy element a bit more, because this wonderful phrase, internationalization strategy, which is a brilliant Scrabble word for those that play Scrabble, but also just it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of wherever people are in their businesses at the moment, whatever their reach is, if they're looking to cross borders, if they're looking to kind of go different continents or whatever, you need a strategy. In business, you need a strategy, you need a business plan, something to follow. But what would be some of the things for people that maybe have a business plan and think, right, we're doing well where we are.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next step for us to scale up if we want to go to a different region, a different country? What would be some of the considerations? You've mentioned sort of ideally language, if your product is sort of label based rather than a service, although language affects service based companies as well, doesn't it? What would be some of the things to consider?
I think if you're looking at expanding internationally, then the first thing to do is to make sure that you really know what are the strengths and weaknesses of your company. And if you know what it is that's made you successful at home, then at least you can consider whether that is a significant factor in the market that you're looking to go to. And of course, selecting international market and selecting the right international market to enter into, that is a whole science in itself that you can spend hours. I can talk on that topic for hours. But actually, I have a free download on that on my website. If anybody's interested, they can sign up and get that very easily. But I think the main questions to ask if you're looking to expand abroad are you successful at home? If yes, what are the factors that make you successful at home? How are your competitors working? If they're international, what are their strategies for expanding internationally? Maybe you already know that you get inquiries from overseas, so you realize that there's a demand, at least to a certain extent, for your product.
Yeah.
Of course, you need to also have you need to have some human resources in order to be able to actually take on such a project. And it's always good to have a little bit of cash available to be able to invest into any new market, even if that's in your domestic country, isn't it? That if you want to enter a new segment or launch a new product, it's good to have some money available to do that with. And then, of course, you start to get into topics like, do we have somebody on our team who can take care of all the technicalities? And do we understand the culture of the market that we're looking to enter into? Because if you've got no idea of how the market ticks, you might be thinking we're very successful because of the way that we are positioned, but you discover that the consumers in the market that you want to enter don't care about that. Maybe they care more about whether you can deliver to them within 2 days from a regional warehouse, or they care about whether your customer service is great. Or they actually only care about the fact that you come from Germany. And if you're from Germany, then obviously your quality must be very good. Or if you're from Italy, then your design is probably going to be very attractive, Yeah. So I think people need to start asking themselves those kind of questions, and also to define for themselves, how will success look for me? If I go into a foreign market, what is my measure of success? Does that mean I earned, 5% of market share? Does it mean I did a turnover of 100,000 or 1 million additionally in a new market? Or does it just mean that I got to see my product on the shelf in a foreign country?
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I like one of the points you touched on near the start. Literally, it's like what we would consider to be a strength within our product or service where we are doesn't automatically translate to another culture, another region, because their perception might be different, their priorities, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's kind of one of the things that you could easily overlook and just assume that, well, we look at the figures here, they look great, so everybody wants
Yes.
the product, and it's like, well, maybe not. So that's good food for thought, I think. Yeah.
I think it's also, for me, one of the most frequent mistakes that people assume, and they therefore fail to understand the target market because they've misunderstood the opportunity. The opportunity is there, but it's not the opportunity that they think is there.
Yeah.
So,
and I suppose that in some ways that also affects how you brand and market the product, because there are different sort of cultural norms, expectations, or preferences as well within the branding, who you get to advertise it, how you advertise it, and all of that sort of stuff as well, I suppose. So in some ways it's almost starting from scratch again, isn't it? And you've got a great product, you've got a good foundation to build from and maybe draw from to minimize the risk of reaching out a bit more. But also you almost have to start from scratch to think, okay, what worked here, and then what are those elements that would actually, we need to factor in wherever we're going to go. Which I guess, that would help us to pick the new location, from what you've been saying as well. But also, how well do we know the culture? What are our competitors doing as well? All makes a lot of sense. It really does. How would you say? How would people go about? Again, this is a big topic. Researching a specific culture. Like, I guess if there's already a connection there with a partner or good friends, then you could explore those avenues to get more kind of information. Is it good to sort of just hire someone to do market research and all of that sort of stuff, or is there a specific first few steps that you've got to do this? However you go from there, these are the fundamentals you have to follow, or is it just literally case by case?
I mean, I think realistically speaking, there are certain steps that you can take to research any market. So you can go through all of the kind of economic factors that you can find on that country, a lot of which you can find online these days. You can find from things like the CIA World Book, you can find all the basic facts about most countries worldwide, what the population is, what the GDP is, whether the economy is growing, shrinking, whether they're in recession. You can also find out what are their main industries, all those kind of very nuts and bolts basic facts about how the market works. And you can also find a lot of information about what are the main sales outlets for most kinds of products. Even if you're saying that you sell B2B and you're looking to enter a market with a distribution partner, he still needs to sell the product somewhere. So you need to also be aware of where that's going to be. And I think that the first stage of any market research should be to do very much the desk research. The internet is a fantastic thing, even if it sometimes lies. But, I think we can do so much from our desks these days.
Yeah.
And you can also ask around. Most entrepreneurs, they know also other business owners, and usually they know somebody who's doing business in country A or B and should ask around. Or there are all those kind of resources, Chamber of Commerce, a lot of countries, the UK, for example, Austria, Germany, they all have commercial attaches in most major markets that you can ask, and who, if you are a member of the Chamber of Commerce, they will support you with basic market entry information, and potentially even with a list of, let's say, approved or recommended distribution partners who might not be suitable for your product or for your company values, but at least they give you the impression of how companies out there are working and which kind of other competitors are on the market, so that you've got somewhere to start from as a basis.
Okay.
I mean, I tend to always say that you should avoid going to places because your wife wanted to go on holiday to Bali, so it's not a reason to enter Indonesia, or because you've heard that, the golf courses in Turkey are wonderful. This is not a reason to enter into the Turkish market. And you don't go to Australia for the air miles. Those are the kind of, it should be backed up by solid business data, in the same way that if you launch a new product in your home market, you also do your homework.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And what you touched on earlier about maybe try somewhere that's not the other side of the planet straight away, someone that's a bit of a stretch but still sort of within a certain, you minimize your risk, don't you, a certain level of
Yeah.
sort of outreach. And I guess longevity of supply as well, isn't it? That could be a key factor, that depending what your product or service might be, you want to get 2 or 3 ideal sort of suppliers around and in play, that should anything go wrong with one, you can keep your things going with that,
Yeah.
I suppose, as well. So yeah.
I mean, it's never good to be dependent on any one market. I think a lot of Central European companies have discovered that, because they had a lot of companies have quite big dependency, or have had quite big dependency on Russia, which obviously this year
Yeah.
is maybe not the best option, and they're now looking for alternatives for that part of their revenue and profits. Maybe one fact which is interesting, according to the US Department of Trade, companies who export have 17% higher profits. So export can also be a road to profitability if it's done well and with a plan and a strategy behind it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah. So for people listening, depending when you're catching this, as we're recording this, we're in the scenario where Russia is at war with Ukraine. Yeah, that's what that's referring to at the moment. You may listen to this a year from now and it might not make as much sense, but right now it's a very real point. And it's also it's a good reminder that there are things that happen which we can't predict, which can affect whole nations rather than just a market, a supplier. And also it's the knock-on effect that one supplier then feeds another supplier, which 4 or 5 steps from here actually affects you. It doesn't directly affect you from the source, but the knock-on effect. Yeah, so that's another good thing to think about.
On the other hand, though,
Yeah, go on.
it's really rare that the whole world is in recession at the same time. Even in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, it kind of rolled across the world. And at the point in time when Europe and the US locked down, then most of Asia was actually coming out of the worst part of their lockdowns, and their economies were already starting to grow again. So you really do spread your risk if you're working in more than one market. I'm not recommending that you start out by entering into 10 new markets at one time, but over time, that if you can step by step expand your international reach, then for sure this can be a risk spreading strategy.
Yeah. And I suppose it's like one aspect of successful entrepreneurs is the fact that you can see ways of making opportunities and success in what could be perceived as very drastic circumstances. We're not belittling anything that's happened and people that have suffered, but there's always 2 sides to a story, isn't there? 2 sides to a coin,
Yes.
in the sense, if you can see it, and you're in a place where you can take advantage of it, or people you can partner with to help you with that, then yeah, there are ways of kind of riding the wave of adversity, shall we say. Yeah, no, that's really good. I like all this. This is really helpful stuff. What would you say? We've sort of touched on some of the challenges and things to think about. Any other sort of perceived barriers that you notice business owners have when they're sort of looking in these different areas, and things they struggle with, or things that would stop them actually following through on certain things?
I think that often, especially small companies, they think that they're too small to export, and that export is only something for, for Siemens, or for, I don't know, for Apple or Mercedes, or all of those kind of huge companies. But
Yeah.
realistically speaking, a small company might actually even have an advantage, because often their product is much more in a niche, and they often are much more agile when it comes to making decisions and reacting to changes in circumstances. They're used to that kind of way of working in their home market. So that can really give them an advantage when they go into an overseas market and they're faced with changing circumstances or something that they really didn't reckon with at all. That can work out quite well. The one thing that they really do need to keep an eye on, though, are things like keeping an eye on the cash flow. because that's something that people often forget about a little bit. In the excitement of getting their first order from overseas, they forget that it might take a while to bring in the money unless they've agreed payment terms up front. So
Yeah, no, that's good. That's for the visionary people out there. They're really strong in that area. Yeah, if you haven't yet partnered with somebody that's a lot more practical, and I mean that in a positive way, definitely connect with somebody that can look out for the figures and understands the analysis side of it as well. Yeah, that's important. I think you need it. A successful business has a good mix of both of those elements. And I think if you're just locked in figures and you're not really looking that far ahead, there's a limit there. But also if you're kind of too far ahead and you lose track of where you are right now, that doesn't work either. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I'm hearing, and we sort of touched on the mindset aspect a bit, but one of the things I'm hearing is it literally how we perceive things. Like, I like what you said about if you're a smaller company, you can either take the approach that we're too small, it's not going to work, or we're small enough that we can be agile and flexible where we need to get places where maybe the big players are tied up in regulations, internal politics, and all the rest of it. We're not in that position. If we're a smaller company, maybe this is a good approach. I think that's really good. And it comes back to what is actually stopping you, or what is perceived to be stopping you. And they're not necessarily the same things, are they? So
no, not at all. And especially in this day and age where you can sell on the internet, then, I don't know, maybe you remember that meme, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Because, basically, if you're selling online, as far as a consumer or a B2B partner is concerned, they're looking for your product. And if you have a product that solves their problem, then they're going to buy it. They don't care if you are a 5-man band or if you're 1,000 people. As long as you can supply the product they need to solve their issues, then you're great to go. And I think there are a lot more opportunities these days that make it simpler to reach out to people across the other side of the world that just didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's really good. This is all good stuff. It really is. We're quite at the end of the chat today. So how can people touch base with you? What's the best way for them to find out more and get that download that you mentioned?
To find out more, you can go to my website, which is kathrynread.com. That's Kathryn and read like a book. Or you can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm frequently to be found on there, also under my name. Obviously.
Perfect. Okay, that's good. There'll be a link to your website below as well. We'll make sure so people can head through from there. But one of the main areas that you focus on is kind of coaching people through the international perspective, reaching out, finding out more about it and all that. So if people are listening and that's the next step for them, definitely head to Kathryn's website, find out more, have a conversation, see if it's a good fit. If you're not thinking of that yet, head to Kathryn's website, get the free download that has step-by-step things to think about, which can all help contribute and add to what she shared with us today. Just to maybe open up your eyes to something that you might have missed, or just make things a little bit clearer as to the next step. If there's 4 steps to take and you've got 3, maybe she can help you with the 4th one that you haven't thought about. Always good, I think, to listen to experts, people that are further down the road, that have got years of experience, years of helping people solve their problems, and help them not make the same mistakes other people are making. So they're the sort of people we should definitely learn from, I think. So, and Kathryn, you're definitely one of those. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time. It always goes fast. It really does. It'll be nice to dig into relationships and how you build relationships and all of that at some point. Maybe you should come back and share your expertise on those elements, because they can be just as important, reaching out into new cultures, new areas as well. But it's been a really good chat today, so thank you. I know you've shared a lot of practical things that the listeners can take advantage of throw into the mix of their planning and their strategy. And there's some good next steps for them, and maybe to challenge their thinking about, actually, I've said I can't do this, but maybe we can actually do that. That could be the very thing that changes and turns things around for them. So all useful stuff. So
I'm always willing to talk to people. So if anybody wants to reach out for a chat, then, there's a link on the website to book a call, and no obligation, just to bat some ideas around and see what could be done.
Brilliant. Okay. No, that's really good. It's always good to connect with people that know what they're talking about as well. So yeah, definitely explore how Kathryn can help you, either now or maybe touch base, and then it could be something for a few steps down the road as well. No, all good stuff. Brilliant. Let's wrap it up there for now. But it'd be good to have you back at some point and continue this discussion further, if we may. That would be really good. Always a pleasure.
That would be a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
No, you're welcome. That's brilliant. And so for everybody listening as well, thank you for joining us. Make sure you do grab hold of one or two things. Just throw it in the mix of what you're thinking about, what you're planning. Maybe just reassess a few things that you've been thinking about and what you think your next steps are. Maybe you can add something else from our discussion today. Definitely do something with what you've heard today and listen to it again, because I never catch the stuff that I need to the first time always. Sometimes it's just a nugget and then I go back and get more. So listen to the episode again, share it with somebody else that may be struggling or may be looking to reach into new areas, new marketplaces as well. We can all help them. The whole point is we believe in your potential, your purpose. We believe you have value. So we want to help you, and we want you to help other people as well. So without further ado, we will leave you for now. Thank you. Join us again. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to Yeukai Business Show. We will be back to bring you more episodes with success stories and advice straight from the experts. Want more? Check out www.yeukai.businessshow.com. Get your free trial of our virtual assistant service today. Just visit www.worldoutsourcingsolutions.com. Quote WOS18 or send us an email at support@worldoutsourcingsolutions.com.